This is Business Edge on News Central. I'm Tolulokwe Adelaru Balogun. Our headline story, AfCFTA, empowering African women. Now, the opportunities for women on the African continent are still a bit limited, but African women are forging ahead. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement could hold the answer to unlocking more of the potential and power of Africa's women. Welcome. This is Business Edge. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, or AfCFTA, is now in play. It's been 1 month of formal connected trade between African nations. However, there is one segment of the economy that has not received as much focus when it comes to how AfCFTA can affect it, and that is Africa's women entrepreneurs. The United Nations Development Program has said that there are more women than ever in the labor market. Yet there are still large inequalities in many regions, with women systematically denied the same work rights as men. More inclusive participation for women is essential to boosting poverty alleviation programs to ensure that they make a real difference. Trade and commerce are happening gradually as different countries begin their vaccine rollouts. And this is the time to ensure that African women can fully participate in all that AfCFTA has to offer. More inclusion is expected for women in the terms of export knowledge, funding opportunities, and access to the continent as well as global markets. Such inclusion, specifically at the local, state, and national levels, will truly assist in improving the lives of women, their families, and economies. Now, joining me on Business Edge is Olori Boye-Ajayi. She is the president of the Export Community Agency, the founder of the Katie Wang Company, and is also the president of the Borderless Trade Network. Good morning, Olori. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
All right. Let's start with the Borderless Trade Network. We just had an event specifically for women in business. Tell us a bit about the network.
The Borderless Trade Network is set to help with what we've seen as a major gap for women in trade, which is collaboration. So we set up this network in order to bring women together to collaborate with themselves, but also to maximize the benefits of the AfCFTA agreement. In most cases, what we find are more skill acquisition type of workshops or trainings. But what we want to do at the Borderless Trade Network is to have a platform that allows for a mindset makeover as well as skill still going to produce average results. So we set to help the women with their mindset as well as their skill set.
Okay. So in terms of what you're seeing in what is missing, what is the most important thing missing and possibly limiting the growth or participation of women in international business, not just the local business that we see, but in being able to scale up and being able to cross the borders, as it may be?
Yes. Well, that's a very good question because I think it's multi-pronged. But I'll start from, the external, which we, of course, know as our government and just basically the environment in which the women are allowed to actually trade in. And what you find is, whilst there are, a lot of trainings and workshops that have been provided for the women via, trade and investment institutions such as NEPC, the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, we find that we still need more targeted training that helps women in specific areas to trade internationally, i.e. technology. So you find that, yes, there's export training, there's all of those things, but women still lack those skills for technology and all of that. Now, on the women's side, what you find with them is they have I'd call it a mindset, and it's a limiting one where we feel like maybe, we're not as good or we can't trade on a global scale. But more so, I feel the women actually need to be shown what is possible, exposure to what is out there for them. So while we're doing these export workshops, we need to also show them what other people in African countries like themselves, women in business, who are thriving and making use of all the opportunities given, like AGOA, the African Growth Opportunities Act, and all the other things that enable us to trade on a larger scale. So I think it's both the government and the women in trade themselves that need to step up.
And you talk about sort of a self-limiting mindset, and that actually comes up when it comes to the issue of finance, but we'll get to that in just a bit. So research, which is really very valuable when it comes to this kinds of conversation, it shows that where women-owned businesses thrive, the community wins. Household income increases, children do better, a country's GDP grows, and the global economy benefits. In places where women's entrepreneurship is restricted or limited, it is the opposite that happens. Individuals, communities, countries, and the global economy actually miss out on unrealized economic gains. The data is there. Why does it seem we've been so slow to make the necessary changes in order to bring more women to the table?
And you know, that question is a really good one. It's such a shame that we still haven't seen the progression we should have by now, with all the, you know, different opposition that women are making. Different communities are standing up and saying, we don't want this sort of treatment. What I think is women need to be invited to the table to make the decisions that pertain to them. And we don't want to be given a quota on how much we can do. We want to be given the freedom to actually express all that we can do for our economy, for our communities, and our businesses. As you rightly said, that women-led or owned businesses actually thrive. And I think it was a research by the International Trade Center that said 40% of a recent survey that they did found that having women in their businesses had a positive effect. I mean, it's a no-brainer. That's what everyone would say. So what I'm saying is, let us as women stand up to the vacancies that are available. Let us look at one another and pick the good points that we can all begin to say, oh, if she can do it, then I can do it. You know, so we need to show more and celebrate women more in the public sector, in the private sector, across board. That's what I think we need to do more.
So in sub-Saharan Africa, only 37% of women have a bank account, compared with 48% of men. And this is UN World Bank research, a gap that has widened in recent years. In North Africa, it's worse. About 2/3 of the adult population remains unbanked, and the gender gap for access to finance is 18%, which is the largest in the world. Credit rationing through high interest rates disproportionately discourages women entrepreneurs from applying for loans, while lack of collateral can mean they have less access to loans than their male counterparts. And when they do have access, women typically face more stringent loan arrangements than men. And when they finally do get the loans, women actually pay back more often than men. And as you said, in terms of self-limiting mindsets, there are women who actually decide for themselves that they can't get this loan and they don't go after it. But obviously, access to finance is a major issue. How do we address what is possibly the biggest hurdle for women entrepreneurs on the continent?
You know, I'm glad you talked about the balance of women being able to repay their loans. In a recent organization I worked for and I consulted for their women's program, it's a banking institution, they actually said something that I feel has been one of the major gaps for women, which is women don't come together to make money. We come together to discuss and gist and have informal conversations. I know. However, I disagree to a certain extent because I feel that is because of the exposure of that particular woman. When I sit together with my friends, I do not just gist and talk entertainment and whatever else. I actually discuss ways of moving my nation forward and all those things. But you find that the reason why they're even able to repay the loans is because they have this sense of, I cannot fail. Women have that imbibed in them. I don't want to fail, I don't want to default. But it's the same fear that allows them not to take the money. You know, so it's almost working against them what's actually a very good thing. So I find that women have to break down this fear in their mind to say, well, if I can pay it back, I can take much more. But I feel that that dynamic is changing as we go along because we find women want to do bigger projects. So we need to sell to them that in order to go to the international space, you will have to have loan facilities in the millions, in the hundreds of millions, but you're not alone. So most times I find that most people feel they're alone in this thing where I won't have a financial advisor, a business advisor, a legal advisor. But if we can let them know you will have these people on your table to guide you on how to manage this loan facility, I think it's just a matter of education. So if we have more institutions helping women in that regard, in educating them on how to finance a loan, how to repay the loan, how to manage the loan, you'll find that they might receive it better than just saying, oh, you have a loan available, so that's what I think.
Okay, so before we go for a break, this is a financial conversation, it's a business conversation, but we can't ignore the cultural aspects, especially when it comes to this loan financing situation. And we've seen certain places where women are the ones who take the loans, but their husbands take the money from them, and it becomes difficult for them to pay it back. We've seen situations where women have formed cooperatives to be able to take bigger loans, and they're successful with that as well. We've also seen situations where the land is not in the woman's name. Assets are not in their name, so it's difficult for them to provide them as collateral in order to access loans and financing. So while we talk about it in business and finance and we talk about political will, we also do have to address a lot of cultural and traditional aspects that continue to hamper women's ability on the continent. How do we address that?
Well, while we may not be able to change traditional values and norms, we can then move the conversation to the part of the enabling party, which is the banking institutions and the other non-banking institutions positioned to help women in trade or in business.
Okay.
And what you'll find in Western countries are they have non-collateral based loan facilities. So they're not waiting for you to have a particular land or whatever it is in your name. They're saying, based on your track record on your business, we are willing to give you this amount in risk. So if we can have more banks doing that or non-banking institutions, that would be a step forward in the right direction.
All right, we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we'll move the conversation more a bit towards AfCFTA and what it holds for women, as well as who is getting it right. In conversations like this, it's very easy to paint everyone black and say no one is getting it right. But on the continent, there might be a few countries who are standing out in making sure that they bring women to the table. That conversation will continue after this. Stay with us. Still with me on Business Edge is Olori Boye-Ajayi. She is the president of the Borderless Trade Network. Olori, let's talk about AfCFTA a bit more now. So it finally officially kicked off on January the 1st, and we know it will take several years for us to feel the full effects of the agreement, but certain things will start working better and differently. And in those years, as we build up to the full achievement and actualization of AfCFTA, we need to have shored up women's ability to partake in continental and global business. Now, in terms of encouraging and educating women across the continent on what AfCFTA can offer them, what work is being done and who's doing the work?
Well, we're doing the work, that's for sure. That's one of the things we're trying to achieve, because we realize that, the heads of states have all signed this wonderful agreement, and yes, for the benefit of the African continent. But I believe that the people who will bear the brunt of this, the impact of this agreement, are both women and youth, because they make up the majority of the African continent. But I believe also that if we have systematic and very targeted approach to the women across the sectors, we will actually be able to sensitize everyone within a few years. This agreement affects the women in markets, local markets. It affects the women in the boardroom. It affects every single woman. And this must not be underplayed, because we make up 90% of the informal sector. And this means that because of the borderless Africa that we have now, the free movement of people and goods could actually work against if these women are not well prepared for this particular agreement.
Very, very true. So let's ask, are some African countries really making effort to bring women to the table? Are some getting it right? And are there lessons that the rest of the countries across the continent can learn? Who do you think may actually really be doing this work and will bear the fruit of it sometime soon?
It has to be the women advocate groups. It has to be the women who have maybe some form of, at the core, they're trying to create an equality and inclusive sort of market for women. It has to be those organizations like She Trades and UNDP, the women departments of these particular organizations. It's not just for anyone to do. It has to be advocacy groups that push this knowledge to the women, that guide them in how to maximize the benefits, because there are numerous benefits for women, but also there are challenges that may come up if we don't induct them into this agreement properly.
So do you think any African country is on the way to getting this right, especially when it comes to women empowerment and bringing them to the table?
I think it's still early days because the agreement just kicked off January 1st of 2021. But what I have seen is an awareness that a lot of countries are seeing that who are the vulnerable groups in our country who may be adversely affected if this agreement does not go into where it should at the early stage. And again, just to point out that everything is progressive. It has to be progressive results, progressive, sort of discussions and sensitive phase stages, and that cannot be sort of overlooked because we're trying to get the information out to these people.
All right, so finally, I'm big on research, and on this particular issue, when you have the naysayers or those who say, why are we focusing so much on women empowerment? I probably am one of those who like to hit them over the head with the numbers, and this research, I don't think anybody who's involved in this conversation can deny. So McKinsey found that if all countries worldwide reach gender equality, the global gains in economic growth would be as much as 26%, with Africa standing to gain 12%. The female economy is the world's largest emerging market, with the potential to add $12 trillion to the global GDP by 2025. Now, clearly, once again, research is pointing to the continent and individual countries needing to do more for women for true progress for their countries to be made. A lot of this comes down to regulation, framework, laws, dealing with some of the issues around culture and tradition for us in particular, and political will. Olori, do you think African countries are really ready to make the necessary changes to bring women to the table and to, of course, increase the potential, their earning power, and, of course, the economies doing the right things for all of us?
I do think it's on the table. I just wonder if the women are at the table. We cannot discuss these issues without the right women at the table. The future is female. We know this.
Yeah.
However, if we are having policies, regulations, laws passed on our behalf without our own consent, our own input, then these laws can only go as far in displacing what has been said, which is there is no progress being made with inclusion of women in workforce or even in business or even in trade and policy matters. So we have to push the conversation to the women, include them, and ensure that they say what they want and they are given that opportunity at the table. This is what I believe should be the case.
All right. Thank you very much, Olori Boye-Ajayi, President of the Export Community Agency, as well as President of the Borderless Trade Network. Thank you for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, you've heard what she says, but also remember the research is there for all of us. If we bring more women to the table, particularly for Africa, the continent stands to gain. So why is it seeming that it's so difficult to do? I think it's a question we all need to think about. But before we wrap things up, let's get into NC4 to watch, and here it is. The African Coalition for Trade and Investment in Natural Gas has reported that several African nations are seeking to increase the consumption and monetization of natural gas across their economies. It highlights that the continent remains one of the lowest consumers of gas globally. Low gas penetration rates in sub-Saharan Africa contrast with the vast amount of natural gas resources found offshore and onshore from Senegal to Mozambique. Now, development of these could lift millions out of poverty and provide the resources the continent needs to industrialize. The African Development Bank has extended financial support to a project that will strengthen the efforts of West African countries to meet their nationally determined contribution targets under the Paris Climate Accord. The bank will underwrite the preparation of concept notes exploring the use of internationally transferable mitigation outcomes in selected West African countries. Morocco's compensation fund announced that the cost of the butane gas and sugar subsidies declined to 11.94 Moroccan dirham. That's about $1.33 billion last year. The number shows a slight decrease from a year earlier when the compensation fund reported that expenditures in the gas and sugar amounted to 12.91 billion Moroccan dirham. And finally, British power producer Global has received the green light to acquire a controlling stake in Quantum Power East Africa GT Menengai, a company contracted to build a 35-megawatt geothermal power plant in Menengai. In a Gazette notice, the Director General of the Competition Authority of Kenya authorized the acquisition, which is expected to kick off construction of one of 3 geothermal power projects with a total capacity of 105 megawatts. That's it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. We have a website. We're on YouTube. We're online. We're offline. And we are on the ground, putting Africa first. Until next time, I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun.